The scene unfolds in another world, Horthia, where dragons lurk, hunting for prey. The dragon shown is not just any ordinary one. It is an ancient magical dragon, Mikaldra, its taming difficulty set to legendary. But this time before it is something it did not reckon with. A continuous barrage of powerful fireballs. It is destroyed by a man known to all as the greatest sage. He alone on the planet is the strongest of all people. Time lapse and the scene shifts to the palace of the magical guild leader, the celestial sage Cedric. Exploded with rage as soon as he heard that his subordinates are urging the emperor to stop the declaration of war on the demons. The three subordinates kneeling before him are the leaders of the magical guild, the three holy sages. In their opinion, when the war begins, they will no longer have time to do anything. Cedric is not one to be knocked down by fear, and since he has already devised a path to victory, he is confident in it. The tension rises with every second. The three holy sages persistently pressure Cedric and ask him to reconsider the decision. There is no guarantee of victory. Throughout the entire conversation, Cedric enjoys red wine, exhaling with relief. The war is approved by His Majesty's will. The only reason the holy sages are there is because they know Cedric holds the greatest power in the country, second only to His Majesty. That hero is not one to be easily moved from his place. He asks if they are ready to sacrifice tens of thousands of their people to the demons, to shoot them like dirty cattle. The holy sages are not at all embarrassed. They do not care. They select the old and children for sacrifice. This time even Cedric cannot hold back and shouts at them, showing his contempt for such practice. Then he asks why they use magic if they cannot even protect their citizens. After taking a sip of wine, he introduces himself the only sage in history who managed to reach the heavenly level, and declares that he alone can save humanity from the demons. Enough talk. Now let them call the guardians and move to force. The man will not allow the soldiers to do as they please and will stand aside, but everything is already well thought out, and suddenly Cedric falls, losing all his strength. Then one of the holy sages reveals the wine was laced with a weakening poison. They knew that only this man could single-handedly defeat several thousand troops. And they knew that the emperor went into battle only because of Cedric's power. The holy sage mocks Cedric, kicks him to the floor, and says that they will destroy him right here and now. To save his life, Cedric admits, if he dies, they will have to live as his cattle. Again and again, the festive scene is indifferent, for the sake of the nobleman, who could always sacrifice commoners to the demons, especially old witches and children. Cedric can no longer endure this senseless noise and prophesies that one day the demons will fall and be brought to their knees. And then people pour a little more weakening potion on Cedric's face, saying that all nobles, except the royal court, see in Cedric only an annoying obstacle. The consolation from others is such that Cedric manages to call them fools with his last words. In the end, Hammond has to finish with a final blow, and Cedric feels the limits of his own strength. It turns out that magical power mostly stops developing after 40 years, so developing the soul, the source of magical power, becomes extremely difficult. Cedric realizes if he were reborn as a child and had the chance to grow up, even defeating monsters like Darkness Dragon, Light Dragon, and Evil World Tree Effector would have been a simple matter. Realizing this, he activates reincarnation magic, a process he had perfected over 20 years. In his soul, the man curses Ammon and his team, calling his reincarnation merely a brief deviation on the path. Later, Cedric opens his eyes and appears as a boy. When he looks at himself in the mirror, he does not recognize the reflection and shudders upon seeing the body that has already manifested, and it is then that he notices the rituals taking place around his bed. Understanding that the ritual is meant to summon a devil, he realizes this was no coincidence. Despite the situation, he has satisfied the mission to obtain a young body succeeded. But just as he was about to continue celebrating, someone calls him young master and says it is time for dinner. Although he is eager to rush forward, the protagonist restrains himself and manages to get dressed. Finally, he reaches the dining table where food is served, and as soon as he takes the first bite, he is struck by the taste, continuously asking for more and more. 1 second, then a third. His senses sharpen with each plate, and after a few more minutes, he asks the support staff to thank the chef who prepared the dish. Everything shatters into pieces moment by moment as soon as he asks about it, and they answer him. For him, it is strange to express gratitude, but since he is no longer the same, he replies that there is nothing strange about it. Praising a person who does their job well is perfectly normal, and as soon as he realizes this, it is not the taste receptors that have improved. The food is astonishingly skillfully prepared. The butler asks if he will attend school the next day since he has been absent for more than 2 weeks without any reason, and adds, as the child of the master's young wife, further absence may result in disinheritance. Cedric notices that there are problems in the household, so he agrees to go to school the next day and asks the butler to accompany him. Returning to his room, Cedric thinks about how to restore the memories of the body he now inhabits. So he casts his sleep magic and memory aid magic on himself. The first memory, how he was bullied at school by a group of students who liked his aid screens. It gets worse when he realizes not everyone loves him, not because of himself, but because of his father's position. The bullies did not stop, they continued to mock him and even called his mother offensive names. Despite the pain, he manages to get up, but not for long. One of the classmates kicks him in the stomach. The attack enrages Alfred, but at that moment, the bully calls his friends and asks if they want to join. One of them agrees, approaches Alfred, who is sitting, calls him a pathetic sack, and uses him to relieve stress. When Alfred tries to get up, his eyes widen. He sees an adult man who is meeting the bullies. This man is his sensei. Alfred calls him for help, but the teacher coldly says they received a message from his father, Algren. The message says that students will be graded based on their marks, and no one at school will make any concessions. Alfred desperately tries to explain that the situation has nothing to do with school activities. But the sensei ignores his pleas and leaves, leaving Alfred all alone. He cries out for help. This is unworthy of being called a teacher. He just snorted mockingly, letting the bullies do whatever they wanted. Alfred was completely confused. He did not understand why all this was happening to him. His teacher did not help, and the bullies called him a sandbag, and he did not resist at all. Suddenly, he noticed one of his acquaintances in the window, who was looking at him. So he managed to crawl to that boy and ask for help, explaining that the offenders behaved completely absurdly, and the teachers were not helping him either. He kept calling Charles for help, because Charles was his best friend. But as it turned out, that nasty boy also rejected him, saying he had received a message from his father. He should not continue the role of Alfred's best friend. Charles smiled as he called that action freedom for him. And with this clarification, he also left this place. Confused and abandoned, Alfred remains alone, only silence and the cruel laughter of the tormentors. The cruelty increases every minute. He is beaten by different people, and each puts all their strength into the blows. The harder he is beaten, the more the tormentors rejoice. All Alfred can do is protect his face. Even the shadows reflect his suffering. For their final act of insane sadism, they demand that he open his mouth to humiliate him once more. This cruelty drives Alfred to madness, and as soon as he returns home, he develops a ritual mania of summoning the devil. When the review of memories comes to an end, the protagonist decides to fulfill the young man's desire for revenge, because in a past life he himself was the devil. The next morning he comes to school with the butler, who expresses concern about his mental and physical condition. This time Alfred boldly smiles and encourages him before sending him back to the palace. As Alfred passes by, he notices one of the tormentors sitting on the stairs. The hooligan recognizes him and throws a strange look. Sheep always travel in herdsend. Very soon the main villain of this event appears, demanding a silver coin in a cold voice. Their long-awaited reunion banquet dragged on, and another one joined in the mockery, begging for a gold coin. Their sinister intentions are obvious. They start advising how to rob Alfred before his father takes control. However, the protagonist remains cautious, understanding that jumping into a fight is boring. So he decides to leave, but they stop him. Even then, bald bully, who threatens him again, as before. Alfred can no longer endure this situation and decides to confront them all alone. As expected, the bald bully got stung. He tries to slap Alfred in the face. This time the main villain intervenes and reminds the offender about the latest scandal among the teachers. Despite the warnings, the bald hooligan is determined to fight. Meanwhile, another hooligan scans the place, figures out the best way, and finally leads the protagonist to a cozy, secluded corner of the school. When they are alone, the hooligan thanks them for such obedience. Suddenly, the main character's voice becomes eerie, raises his hand, and says that threatening the weak is not elegant at all. This is enough to anger the balding aggressor. He decisively lunges at him. But Alfred remains motionless, as if waiting for an attack. This time everything is different. Alfred defeats the offender with one move, swapping places with him. The hooligans freeze in shock as soon as they realize something is terribly wrong. Before they could make another move, Jelford activates his magic, unleashing an explosion that breaks the offender's neck. The fight ends as quickly as it began, leaving the protagonist coldly smiling at his senseless opponent. The second hooligan trembled in his heart when he asked if Alfred had brought some magical item specifically for this. Alfred, too cold, turned to him, dismissed it, and said he had black magic honed by his own hand. For that man it was pure nonsense. He seized the chance, attacked him like his bald friend, also calling him a loser, as expected. Before he could even touch the protagonist, he was punched in the face with such force that red nasal blood flowed. Again, Alford felt he had inflicted considerable damage on the troublemaker, so he began healing on his own. After dealing with the first, he rewound time to make the wall whole again, and he knew his injuries could be healed. But his memories could not be erased. He felt relieved. Even if the hooligan told someone about it, no one would believe him anyway. Finally, as soon as Alfred left the place, the troublemakers stood up. They were also confused and scared because they saw themselves completely alive and perfectly fine. One of them was sure that Alfred was a poster boy, but he had no proof either. In the end, they concluded that it was illusion magic from the House of Elites. Everyone again thought that he needed to pay for it. On the other hand, the protagonist felt, with each passing minute, the memories of the body converged with him, synchronized. It was then that someone called him, and when he turned around, he saw his. The dirty teacher interrogates him whether he is still a first-grade student. The news was about his transfer to Class 3 from that day. The instruction was simple: go up the stairs and go straight to the end of the second floor. But before he could leave, the teacher clarified this was the last time he would show leniency to Alfred. Alfred, without showing a drop of interest in the warning, simply thanked and walked away. As soon as he left, the teacher savored the moment when high nobility was turned into a miserable state, into the fate of a slave. When Alfred reached the edge of the turn on the second floor, he saw the classroom. As soon as he entered, chaos already reigned there. Not a moment passed before some girl ran into him and fell to the floor. She, a little worried about her own pain, recognized the boy. She was completely confused by her reaction and told him that she had been worried about him all along because she thought he might have taken his own life. Suddenly, the girl grabbed him and pulled him along, and questions swirled in his head end. Then Ulfur decided to ask her who she was. She paused for a moment, then introduced herself as the president of the sleigh class. Soon they reached an open area where several students were doing some work. When the protagonist inquired, he was told they were picking up pebbles. Before he could fully understand, the girl had already knelt down and asked to join. First graders were about to begin magical training, and the pebbles were needed to prevent falling to the floor. Suddenly she realized why he was confused and decided to explain the system. The class system was a pyramid. The higher nobility made up the first class, diligent nobles the second, and those who fell out of this status ended up in the third class or the slavery class. She added that besides division by grades, they also relied on points, and if he did not accumulate enough by the end of the year, he could be expelled from the school. The girl tried to complete the task as quickly as possible and explained how to rise all the way to the first class. All these methods boiled down to serving the nobility, carrying things for the nobility at home, and even the pebble activity end, she was involved in that too. The lady was determined to prove her worth to them. She wanted them to understand that even a commoner could become a mage in the Empire, just like Cedric, who had recently died. This statement turned events upside down. But the girl was more concerned about the arrival of the nobles, so the protagonist decided to help them with his magic, dug up the pebbles instead of them. It was then that nobles from Class 1 arrived, complaining about the stench from the commoners. However, when they saw Alfred among the commoners, they finished him off with their mockery for his father abandoning him and for losing his noble title. These nobles called him a miserable doomed man, and all those statements continuously boiled his blood. Then the nobility decided to go to a training session and asked him to watch over them. At first, they released magic with a fireball from magic wands and tried to hit the target. Others also continuously tried hard during the training. One of them called for water, so that lady later brought it, but they just wanted to humiliate her, so one of them slapped that sweet princess on the floor. As if they were playing with children from Class 3, like with toys. That was enough for the protagonist, and he was disgusted by their behavior. His character felt like a slave in his own country. Alfred picked the girl up from the floor and said that at this rate Class 3 would never be able to reach some classes, and raised their grades so that they could move on to other classes. However, the lady accepted her fate as a slave with tears in her eyes, and this confused the main character. The whole order gave off coldness, and he realized the system itself was rotten to the core. Suddenly, the nobleman fell to his knees, and feeling pain, called for the one responsible for cleaning the place where he was injured. Ford did so, but the lady took the blame upon herself. Noble was furious and relentlessly demanded payment equal to his blood, but she bravely, with tears in her eyes, rejected his accusations, claiming she was not even hurt by a pebble. These words were enough to strike a sensitive chord in Noble. As expected, not understanding the situation, he threw a punch aiming to hit the girl in the face. This time his fist stopped in midair, and it turned out that our protagonist had already realized he is the main character. Not only did he block the blow, but he also pushed the nobleman back. The latter tried once more, but this time attacked with a kick. Alfred again protected the lady and took the kick without flinching. The blow was so strong it could have split his head, which is why the lady asked if he was okay. Alfred was fine, he had already managed to set up the barrier. It was then that the nobleman revealed the idea of that plan is promoted by the one who was involved in the attacks earlier, his own offender. The hero realized, those who attacked him are them. But despite everything, Zenat began to spout nonsense about some round of 10 blades. According to its disclosure, the round table of the 10 blades was directly subordinate to the emperor. It was considered a bureaucratic organization that managed the school to train the next generation of 10 blades. He wanted to inform Alfred that the 10 best students with the highest grades would be appointed as potential candidates for the next 10 blades. Ultimately, it came down to the fact that while they were undergoing training, they would be involved in matters such as managing commoners and resolving disputes among nobles. The protagonist was interested in this explanation. He was glad that he had finally found a way to control the population at such an age. Moreover, he was interested in learning the names of the 10 blades that had driven him into a corner. He did all this for the sake of the child who became his vessel. Once again, his dreams shattered when that boy refused to know their identity. But the nobleman was more concerned with seeing Alfred's face again if the protagonist could pass the exam the next day to advance to the second year. Again, that noble boy puffed himself up complacently. He considered Alfred a rival who hardly knew any magic at all. Every nobleman looked at the protagonist with their terrifying eyes and thus threatened him. But all the heroes could do was thank them. They were baffled by this act, so he clarified that the thanks were for the valuable information they had given him. What he now planned was to defeat them in the promotion exam and then achieve his best grades. As soon as he finished his sentence, the nobles looked at each other and burst out laughing loudly. They did not expect such a worthless boy like him to say something like that and with such confidence, so to crush him even more, they declared, even if he did manage to get promoted. He would never be able to become the best student in the school. Again, he failed to understand, so some noble explained to him about the competition for class representation. It was an exam introduced that year to sort out the best in the school. Hearing about it, he thought it was a standardized test to check academic knowledge, but he also understood they could not be organizing a show fight to test their abilities. That is why they selected certain people for the competition and used ranks to determine the best among them. The most shocking news was that the second and third classes planned to forfeit their positions. What that bastard wanted to achieve was one thing. Our protagonist would not have a chance to participate in the class representation. But as soon as Alfred heard the word forfeit, he left the lady in distress and turned to the nobleman with a question. What would happen if he passed the selection in the third rank and defeated his classmates so badly that he would spit out his guts? None of us or them expected such a statement from a third-year student. The gentleman had already heard enough of his chatter. But soon the teacher arrived and stopped them when they were about to fight, as if he had heard everything from the beginning. Then he told our protagonist, if the third grader manages to defeat the first grader, he will recognize the third grader, not the first. He also promised to remove the slave-owning system from the school. It was not a simple matter. In the teacher's eyes, even public shame was still part of a slave's life. Then the scene returned again to the classroom, where the lady lost her composure and asked why he had acted that way back on the playground. Others also agreed with her. They knew they would suffer along with him. The main character was calm as clear water, then asked if it didn't hurt them when they were treated like trash during treatment. Despite this, the students of that class were glad to stay within the lower class because they believed it kept them in good spirits. Alfred was too cold-blooded to react to this, but still pushed aside his affairs and asked if any of them would participate in the interclass competition with him. His classmates began mocking his intellect because they did not want to be suspected of having a stubborn nature like his. All this made him realize they were worth nothing, for both their hearts and souls had already resigned themselves to slavery. Somehow the lady found the courage to tell him that she intended to join him. It turned out that her name was Percy, and no one in the class expected her decision. She was threatened with consequences for disobedience, but she was not worried at all. She knew they were already being held like slaves. Holding that memory in her mind, she decided to rise higher and accept what had happened. Alfred noticed all this and realized that her character was different from the others. While the others quietly discussed stepping away from the war, Class 3 was preparing to initiate an attack against Class 1. They recognized the two of them as a burden for the entire class. However, they knew 3 were needed for this, and classmates objected that some third person would agree to the task. Even Alfred understood finding a third at that moment was not so simple. But he suddenly turned to them and said that he did not rely on any of them. Percy had just agreed. Expressing his opinion, he stood up and reassuringly assured them, everything would be fine, because there was one person in that academy whom he knew. Then the scene shifted to the outskirts of Sword City, to the designated danger zone known as the Forest of No Return. The boy was one-on-one with a deadly monster. He claimed that he was the greatest genius the Magic Institute had ever seen. That boy easily slipped away from the monster. He had skipped several grades in elementary school and then graduated from the Magic Institute at 12 years old. All his achievements led him to knock on the door of the Magical Guild without even finishing high school. But as soon as he entered the apex of the mage's domain, the towering man called him Cyrus Taylor and said that his entrance exam had just begun. Confident that he was at the top of the magical world, he was full of faith in himself. And on the day of the exam, at the entrance to the guild, one of the celestial sages, Cedric, stood before them. As soon as everything started, Cyrus used third-level magic stone missile. He did not hold back at all, because he thought his opponent was one of the most powerful sages. His plan was to attack at the very moment of the opening that would appear when Cedric nullified his spell. This foolish boy was here not only to pass the exam, he was here to become the 12-year-old who defeated the guild master. The only thing he aspired to was to become a legend. But fate wrote a different story. His plans and expectations shattered completely when Cedric mercilessly crushed his attack with bare hands. Prowess was completely stunned by this act of cruelty. He immediately returned to guard and jumped back to a distance from the man. Cedric suddenly finished the exam and announced his decision. Denied Sir admission to the guild. The reason for his refusal is the immaturity he had at 12 years old. The little child, angry, protested and burst out with words that this was his first defeat and only because he fought with the heavenly sage. None of this convinced Cedric. He ordered him to first finish his studies at the magic school and only then join the guild. In Kira's view, there was nothing left that he could still learn at the institute. His attitude was full of confidence. To teach the little brat a lesson, Cedric released mana right in front of him, showing how much mana he had restrained in the previous battle. Hearing this, Cyrus immediately understood. The mana began to take the shape of a large football, therefore, the control was truly serious. And the guildmaster added that this required colossal concentration, and that concentration is the foundation of mana control. In the end, all he tried to make Kira's do was to keep the mana at his level to achieve body strengthening, so small tricks like his stone projectile would be child's play. When Cyrus refused, Cedric told him that this was a basic thing taught even in elementary school. This was even more stunning for the genius, and he flared up with rage as soon as he realized that Cedric was saying. His magical abilities did not even reach the simplest techniques. But very soon he realized, everything Sir Cedric said was the complete and sole truth. With his eyes, he saw only a man with incredible magical abilities. Then Cedric left the hall, nullifying Cyrus's magic to zero. After that, Cyrus trained diligently. 5 years had passed, and he had been attending the senior school of the Magic Institute all this time. During that period, his skills and abilities were almost at the instructor level. That is why he studied directly under the headmaster's guidance. The monster he fought then was a Minotaur difficulty 8 due to its physical abilities. That 17-year-old boy fought the monster using only body-strengthening magic. Make a real easy prey out of such an opponent. His first strike broke the monster's shield, but it was not enough for victory. He knew that one strike would not help, so he arranged a whole series of heavy blows for the monster. He knew in this situation he could not lose the fight, and keeping this thought in mind, he delivered a blow so powerful that it pierced a hole in the Minotaur. Cyrus finally felt happiness after all, he was improving. But suddenly the air in the zone changed, and within seconds Cyrus was surrounded by a whole pack of Minotaurs. He shuddered from shock. According to reports, there should have been only one left. Fear gripped him, his body was already worn out from excessive dependence on body enhancement magic. Cyrus understood, chances of survival were almost none. Yet he decided to take at least 3 of them with him. He did not flinch for a moment and raised his wand, thinking that his magical control was not up to this boy's level. He barely had time to start the spell. From nowhere appeared a figure, stopping several Minotaurs with a single blow. Kyra was momentarily confused by the sudden appearance, but, as you and I might expect, it was Alfred Kazdrick who scored 65 points for Cyrus. As soon as the protagonist landed on the ground, he called Cyrus by name and said they had something to talk about. But first, he asked to clean everything up and put things in order. 5 years long, but not enough for Cyrus to forget that exquisite magical control that belonged to the great sage Cedric. When the mud cleared, Cyrus headed to Disney's. And Pro 6 Tagonist decided to tell this story to Prodigy. After some time, the scene shifted again to the school, where Cyrus and the entire Class 3 were present. They were amazed to see the genius of the Magic Institute there. Everyone fell silent as soon as Cyrus began to speak about his special status and told them that, as a research student, he had already recognized the value of participating in all the educational activities offered. The main message was this: the president decided that Cyrus would represent the class along with two other members. Returning to the Forest of Uncertainties, Alfred introduced himself as the reincarnation of Sorcerer Cedric, and asked to keep all this a secret from everyone else. The day finally came, the written exam for the second-year promotion test. The nobleman was still swelling with self-love and mocking Alfred. Others were with him. They called Helford a fool for, like a madman, dreaming of reaching the top with such low grades. While they enjoyed their tiny happy moments, one of them appeared at the door and, breaking it down, announced that Cyrus had been enrolled in the slave class. They were all in complete shock from this statement, and when they remembered that he was the same genius with a special pass, they could not understand how this had happened at all. They knew, if this happened, there would be a confrontation of class against class. Another thing that worried them was the shift of the academic discipline from second to third. Baldy, having finally thought it all through, reassured them, there is no problem with this. In his head, everything was rosy. He thought that there were two other fools in the team. They felt relieved by this clarification. On the other hand, when Alfred was walking down the corridor with Cyrus, everyone was stunned to see such a genius among the lower class. Pers was then worried about Alfred, but when he asked what the reason was, she informed him about his enemies, those he would have to fight in training battles. Another reason to worry was how he performed in the trial battle. If he did not endure and clear that fight, they would not be allowed into the final team battle. But that little thing did not escape our hero in his eyes. A failing result on the school exam was simply impossible. Yet Pers looked much more tense than him. So Alford was more concerned about her. He asked her to do her best on the exam and said that was the only thing that mattered. Pers instantly changed her behavior and made it clear to them that she would not lag behind in the written exam either. After that, Pers told them that her real name was Lisa Wilson and asked to be called that. As for the team, the time had come and the exam was about to begin. It was a written exam and Lisa was already nervous. She understood that 40 minutes had passed and 60 were still ahead. The difficulty of the test was insane for her. But she decided to give her all. She understood that they would leave her behind. When she saw that the main heroine was sleeping during the exam, she was shocked. Then she tensed even more, seeing how he seemed to give up after his confusion. She was worried, but as soon as Cyrus looked at the paper, he understood. The tasks were too difficult for a first-year student. And yet it was hard for that boy to believe that Alfred would manage the task in just 10 minutes. Everyone thought he was just sleeping, but on the other hand, he grasped at every moment of concentration he could snatch. It was a technique called the tandem light method. Inspired by the example, Cyrus himself passed the exam in a moment and immediately began practicing the technique, leaving Lisa completely delighted once again. After the exams ended, time flowed until that very night in the teacher's lounge. The teachers were stunned when they saw that the student from the lower group scored full marks, even more than the SIR percentage. It was even more shocking to them. The exam was deliberately designed so that no one could score full marks. It contained the latest magical equations deciphered by the late Cedric. The teachers stubbornly refused to believe that a student solved it and concluded the test questions had been leaked. When they reported to the president, they called it a difficult situation and demanded action against the student who scored full marks. The situation was difficult, so the president ordered an investigation even before the results were announced, which would be only a day after the next one. And the teachers did not hold back and continuously demanded action. The president sharply stood up in anger and stated that it was hasty to jump to conclusions immediately. But when he pondered how to fulfill Cyrus's request to transfer him to the third grade through Alfred, he realized that there was something truly interesting in him. Then the scene switched to the next day, to the place of the personal trial exam. In the arena, the protagonist stood alone against Kust Sensei and Baldy. He was continuously mocked and told that they would bring a fitting punishment to the cheater. That is exactly how the personal mocking battle began. Then the teacher called him the worst person on the entire earth, and Alfred realized that it was somehow connected to his written result. But at that moment, the teacher's face suddenly changed, and he told him that he had received a perfect 100 on the test. The bald man was completely stunned and began to lose control, but the teacher stopped him for a moment to add a twist to the story. Without thinking too long, he accused Alfred of stealing the question sheet. He accused him of this, deciding that Alfred was trying to earn his father's respect. The teacher also began to lose control when he thought about the fact that Alfred committed such a pathetic act and called him even worse than cattle. But somehow he pulled himself together and told my cow that this was an exceptional case. and at that inspection, he allowed him to go too far without any hesitation. He called the forced wet battle, a punishment for stealing the exam record from the sacred school. Michael grimaced, brushing off the anxiety as a trifle, but sighed with relief because he already had a stamped agreement. He firmly decided to curse Alfred's existence himself. He had enough of his chatter, and the protagonist asked him to go at him to get revenge. Both of them laughed as soon as they heard it. As in the teacher's eyes, there was still a chance to find a silver lining, but forgiveness was not an option at all. Finally, the time came when the chatter ended. It was time for them to start the battle of suffering. My order was unequivocal: crush him completely, without a trace. Where the main character sighed with relief, there was nothing to worry about. Michael rushed at him in the first attack, but Ulford did not flinch for a moment. Because he knew he only needed one hand. Suddenly he realized that the body no longer moved. And so Baldy managed to intercept Alfred. The man was in the mood to fight, so he grabbed the protagonist from behind and tried to perform a curved throw with a bam. He managed to land the hit, and he exhaled with relief, deciding that the fight was already over. But everything was no longer as before, so the main hero got up without a scratch. Baldy tried again to slam him down to the floor with a strike, and again Alfred's body did not obey him, and again Michael managed to land that heavy blow. This blow made him remember the torments of the childhood soul that lived in that body. His suffering was much greater than what he was experiencing at that moment. Baldy relentlessly attacked the protagonist, and he again and again replayed the fear in his head carved right into his own flesh. Not much time passed before he calmed the young man's soul and promised to take revenge and settle the score. As soon as he made that promise, the body moved at his command, and he was able to stop Baldy's attack. His response was even fiercer than he could imagine. After all, the force of the blow he delivered was such that it could crush a human skull. That one blow threw that fool, and he flew into the air. In the end, he again became just a poster boy, carved on a broken wall. Soon that kid lost consciousness, and Alfred mocked him right at that moment. My call could not make sense of the situation. It was impossible to believe in his powerlessness, in the inability to move, and in that agony that was tearing the body apart. Suddenly Ulford approached him, and Michael began to beg for mercy due to his complete defenselessness. Then Alfred looked at the teacher and told Bedvi that he was waiting for the final whistle. On the other hand, the teacher was trembling with pure fear, and the protagonist was preparing to deliver the final blow. But when Alfred raised that filth for the attack, Michael, in tears, begged for mercy. But when he deserved nothing, Alfred delivered the final blow. It was so painful that it broke my ribs. As soon as Alfred struck, he precisely aimed the attack at the mystical circle forged inside the back. Its sole purpose was to steal the magic from the sorcerer forever, a technique that even the king's elite mages could not master. Alfred knew that the boy came from a prestigious line of battle mages, and decided to teach him a harsh lesson with his own eyes by snatching his magic away. The protagonist did so because from the memory of his vessel, he learned, the fools mocked the boy because of his magic. There was nothing wrong with this after all. We all know that meritocracy can be a ruthless beast, so he deserved it. Then the scene jumped to the next day. Everyone was looking at the scoreboard with each person's scores. The nobles could not believe their own eyes when they saw that Alfred scored a perfect 98 points. Soon one of the nobles informed them that Michael would soon be transferred to a medical facility in the capital after the battle. Their chances were getting worse and worse. It was becoming harder and harder to believe. While they continuously discussed and chatted, Alfred ignored it all from outside. He knew they probably wouldn't catch a single word, and there was no need for them to. He felt guilty and forced himself to clarify. A wise man like him would not interfere in such pathetic battles. But since he promised his ship, he was going to make them pay for what they had done. His targets were 5 who were still unnoticed. He knew he needed to quickly find the next contender. After a while, he spoke with Lisa, and she was very surprised to hear that the boy ended up in the hospital after yesterday's training fight. Alfred called it the law of karma, but this was not enough to calm her down. She immediately burst out screaming, spilling irritation. How did it happen that she was left alone with Alfred in the shooting range? She needed confirmation that she was taking the target test. But before the protagonist could say a word, someone called him from behind. These were nobles from Class 1 who arrived at the scene to see his pathetic performance live. According to his reports, the examiner refused to provide any details of the match. So again, Noble accused the main character of slipping drugs to Michael, and because of that, duping him. In his eyes, no one of such a worthless level as he could so easily defeat Noble. Finally, it became clear. The real reason for their immediate summons to the shooting range was revealed. It was a sight prepared by Class 1 to make them look like fools in front of others. The aristocrat enjoyed the moment of his life. The protagonist walks by, and he is even teased. Ford realized that cheating was suspected on the last exam, but Lisa was worried about the shooting targets. The hero did not worry about Thish knew that only accuracy and strength were needed for all tests. With such relief, he asked her about how their wet battle with Cyrus had gone. It was obvious from Cyrus's reputation. He declared victory even before the battle began, and moreover, the truth was that she was the winner too. In the middle of the arena, she told him that she might not meet expectations. But Alfred, adopting the hero's pose, assured her that there was nothing to worry about. He and Cyrus would handle it. Lisa was too inquisitive. She wanted to learn as much as possible about the main character because she believed something extraordinary was happening to him. All she wanted was to see him. Alfred called aimed shooting a delusion. In his eyes, there was no point in breaking your targets if there was no defense or any means of revenge. Suddenly Cyrus appeared. He picked up his words, agreed, and said that he was too stuck in the truce. In fact, he meant that the director had ordered him to set an example before they could take aim. Cyrus realized that among the crowd of spectators, they were offering the genius to show his powers, so he decided it was a conspiracy to hype up a spectacular act. Asking such a genius as him to break a wall that was impossible to overcome was a real humiliation. Another moment and the exam was about to begin. The nobly came only to witness Alfred's suffering, but something more worthy awaited them. The competition was between a genius and the most mediocre of the mediocre. Finally, the genius made the first move. He began to aim at the wall and used a giant firewall that precisely aimed at the target. Everyone shuddered, seeing the true power of Cyrus. They realized there was no chance against him. Everyone was amazed how a child like him took the 7th level of magic in his hands. Even Alfred was stunned, because this is a level reserved for the elite departmentor for the academy leaders. And even during that attack, the special target with magical immunity completely disappeared. The protagonist got a second chance to show strength, but he still did not know whether it was worth hitting him. On the other hand, the nobility wallowed in Alfred's misery. Again, Cyrus, if he threw a tiny fireball, it would be ridiculous. The protagonist heard all this and created a completely different level of aura around himself. He knew deep in his heart what he would make them see would turn everything upside down. As if he had already calculated everything, he just cast his magic. The director was completely stunned upon seeing the incredible amount of magical power. What he cast was magicit, was used to make the meteor fall. But the nobleman rejoiced upon learning that Alfred's magic had failed with a loud crash. He was about to laugh, but the joy did not last long. From the blue sky, out of nowhere, they suddenly noticed a meteor falling. With precision to the length of the trajectory, that meteor was aimed directly at the target. The director was still in a shock stupor from what had happened, and the noble scum was dragging its own. It's simply incredible. This meteor not only hit the target, but also successfully destroyed the land itself. Lisa had suspicions, but she could never imagine that things would go this far. As a student, Cyrus praised his master's techniques. He felt the magical power inside as the meteor fell. That was not enough, so Ulfur told him. If the meteor were truly its essence, the academy itself would have turned to dust. Lisa trembled from what she heard. Their talks were simply incredible. And the deputy headmaster pondered whether the student could master the 8th tier of magic. He thought it was only 20 of the true power, but still it equaled the peak might of the head of the school. On the other hand, the nobles who gathered to mock him could not get involved in the fall in their own pit. One was already calling to lure him into a trap, and another suddenly realized, this cannot be a trap. He felt that the boy was actually that powerful. This man trembled with fear and wanted to flee all the way to the hospital, but the dirtiest one was determined to tear the face off the man in the mask, Alfred. After that, the scene shifted to the imperial capital of the magic school, thanks to the Healing Magic Rehabilitation Center. As soon as someone opened their eyes, it turned out to be the bald scoundrel Mikkel, who was thinking about his misfortune. As soon as he realized he was in the hospital, his suffering from the last simulated fight played before his eyes. He needed time to come to terms with the fact that he lost the match as a member of the prestigious magic family. He had only one thought in his head, to make Alfred answer for his actions. He was even ready to pressure the academy through his old man, but as soon as he tried to get up from the bed, something evil ran through his body. A lady came there and addressed him, "Young sir," and she was accompanied by a doctor. Michael recognized the girl. It was Amelia, and told her that he wanted his body to heal as quickly as possible to knock Alfred to the ground. However, the doctor objected to this and stated that it was impossible. His refusal meant nothing to Baldy, so he decided to leave from there. To make him understand even better, the doctor ordered him to look at his own legs. They were weaker than even a thin plank. everything that drew out the wildest flashes of memories about that battle from him. The doctor also told him that it would take 6 months for him to live a normal life again. But before he could finish speaking, the stubborn Baldy repeatedly demanded to be released. This time Amelia stepped forward to stop him, and his temperature soared so high that he began to threaten. He said he would kill them if they stood in his way. Neither the doctor nor Amelia flinched in the slightest. He took it as a personal insult and tried to strike them with a second-level spell ice needle, but it was all in vain. Nothing happened, and at that moment the magic was not cast. Before he could realize it, the doctor said, "Devastating damage to the magical scheme was found in his back." Even the doctor was completely stunned and eager to find out the level of skill of the sorcerer. In the end, he clarified, "Since then my bell will no longer be able to control any magic." When he finished, Amelia added that they are a family devoted to the craft of magic. Lord Pan announced the decision. The young Master Michael would be stripped of his status and the title of eldest son. He had already been expelled from the academy. Under such circumstances, my call will take the full brunt of public attention and meticulous scrutiny. The next statement shattered Baldy's hope. Since then, he would never be released from that estate again. Everything was happening too fast, so Mikkel lacked the time to understand, and the only thing he could do was ask the doctor to fix his problems. He was still thinking about being the strongest, so he lunged at the doctor, intending to hit him. As expected, he stumbled halfway back. Pains twisted him. The doctor immediately asked Amelia to bring some anesthesia, and Michael was in tears as he went through that torment. But as soon as she rushed out of the room for the medicine, she saw that some students from Class 1 were eavesdropping on their conversation. This nobleman could not grasp what was happening. The only thing he could think about was the protagonist's face and the trembling from fear of the devil's revenge. He was lying on the floor, and the noble's fear was confirmed by Charles. He also added that everything is turning into a real mess. Then the nobleman realized the hero conducts wet fights as a cover and intends to send them straight to the hospital. On the other hand, another was embarrassed by the sudden increase in Alfred's power. Then Charles explained to them, Alfred's family comes from a legendary line of sorcerers. The only clarification is about his sudden awakening of genetics. While others could not process the awakening, Charles told them the backstory of the current deputy leader. He comes from a line attributed with connections both to the dragon god and to humans. Judging by those whispers, the dragon god might have suddenly awakened inside him. Other nobles did not want to believe that such a thing could happen to a nobody like him, but in any case, they understood. They would have to devise a strategy to defeat a monster like Alfred. They did not want to end up like Michael, so they had to prevent that man from stepping into the deceitful battle. As soon as he told them this, the ugliest of all reported that his father was the lair of the serpent, so he could do it through a high-ranking representative from the Emperor's intelligence agency. And Charles confirmed the same noble connection that his father had with the Guild of Assassins. Next, the scene shifted to the Guild of Assassins. There a man was explaining to the nobleman that an 8th-level sorcerer cannot be a student. So if it were so, he already knew, the protagonist could reach the level of a court sorcerer. This nobleman became excessively angry and began to utter grotesque nonsense about the Guild of Assassins to convince him. And when the man from the guild took it as a personal insult, he repeated again that it was not such a simple task. The shocking incident lasted, but not long. The guild members changed their attitude. He asked the nobleman to enter negotiations while I am pointing to what can defeat him. It was a slow poison that slows down the use of magic, but its only downside is the loss of magical ability. This assassin wanted the young lord to force that man to drink it. As soon as the boy heard about his inability to perform magic, he immediately became excited. His imagination formed everything. He even added the option to remove him as well. The assassin was already about to ask him about the price, but before he could even open his mouth, wealthy children scattered gold coins before him. These were the money left after selling the treasure gifts from their estate treasury 2 years ago. He himself stole that value, and when a commotion arose in the estate, as the eldest son, he got out of there without any obstacles. Eventually, one servant was executed for the crime, and he liked how the executioner worked. Learning about the boy's character, he cut the price of that tincture by 50. That address was a kind of advance bet. He wanted to make him their highest-level client as soon as he became the head of the family, and finally, he sealed the deal. And then thought to beat that scoundrel to death with that tincture. After the scene switch, Halford was visible. He was enjoying the food. And Lisa was stunned when she saw the mountain of plates he had already devoured, as if he were experiencing the most exquisite banquet of his life. After he finished the banquet of dishes, he was ready for luxury after coffee, but before he could move, a nobleman approached him and asked for some time. Alford could not tolerate such interference. And then he told him that he had brought a cup of tea to sweeten his thoughts. To make everything seem easy, he added that he came to apologize. Alfred felt nothing awkward about this and asked how I was doing with the call. Hey, sipping tea, he told him about the loss of the word shame in his vocabulary. This nobleman was too happy to see that man fall into his trap. And finally, he reveals the truth. He ended up there because he found out who exactly were the candidates for the 10 Swords of the Round Table. He knew that the candidates would fall under the jurisdiction of the National Intelligence Agency. The protagonist was eager to learn the names of these people, but the nobleman refused to disclose such information in such an inappropriate place. Then he asked that man to go there, to the best place for this conversation. As soon as the location changed, this nobleman was taken under the protection of a whole pack of mages. But he still could not understand. It did not fit in his head whether he had said something harsh about the trial exam. Then the nobleman clarified. His fault was thinking about revenge against the highborn nobleman. He continued mocking Alfred, reproaching him that he had no noble blood since his own parents had cast him into the status of a commoner. Fordu had to stand guard and tell him about his grief being stuck in this situation. In return, the nobleman chuckled, seeing how he maintained his bravado. But he was still sure that he could not match the power of the nobles. He said this because he was a great nobleman, and in his opinion, being a nobleman meant that they could bend the world however they pleased. The protagonist was worried about those scoundrels standing there to stop him with money and connections. The nobleman was certain of this too, but then he was told that the coffee he had just drunk was mixed with something. As befits a man of honor, Alfred laughed loudly, mocking the poor condition of the nobleman, and told him that he would not make the same mistake twice. He was able to neutralize that poison in an instant and immediately recognized the local men from the Guild of Assassins. After the protagonist learned about this presence, he understood. Only one of the top tiers could have sent him on the assassination. Again, the nobleman froze in amazement. He knew it was a trap, yet he still moved straight into it ahead. He responded positively, saying that there is a certain theme behind all this. The nobleman still did not understand, so Alfred explained, the theme of battle to wipe out the ruffians is perfect for an afternoon workout. Just then, and in a moment, one of the killers rushed forward to finish off Alfred. As expected, he easily blocked the strike. And then he used his strength and shattered that man's bones to pieces. The protagonist was too cold to stop it all right there. It didn't take him long to exterminate more than half of the assassins. He fought continuously, clearing his path, and did it with ease. The assassins tried all techniques to get behind him. But each time they were defeated. With his pure strength, he knocked down every one of them. When it was all over, the nobleman couldn't believe that some mortal, who couldn't even control magic, went against a member of the Assassin Guild. Clarifying, he said he had perfected the martial arts of the East and that the skill he used belonged to the realm of the divine. Then the main character realized the nobleman was the only one standing. So he struck him too. Shortly after, he began unleashing a whole series of blows until the nobleman begged for mercy. As before, he had no mood to spare the enemy, so he continued his work, making him suffer. Everything went smoothly as he unleashed his first strikes. The nobleman couldn't keep his eyelids open at that moment. Finally, when he was on the verge of falling to the ground, the hero caught him and used his advanced healing magic to heal the body. Once again, that act left the nobleman confused. He could not understand why he was doing it. He did not understand why, just when the man was on the verge of losing consciousness, he was given some relief. It was as if he really held some grudge against him. The first round was revenge for all the trolling he had endured at the academy. In fact, it was not over yet. The second round was about to begin any moment. The second round was about to end, and he successfully pinned that man to the ground. And even after that brutal attack, the man was still not satisfied. So he used level 10 teleportation magic. Then he was teleported somewhere in the mountains. As soon as he landed at the place, he realized a lot of time had passed since his last visit to that hideout. After the attack he had just endured, he learned it was a strike doomed by the guillotine of Death Black Serpent's venom. He considered the circumstantial evidence flawless and He thanked his files from his past life for the information. He knew if it was the same man he imagined, he would act quickly again. The hero realized that before him was a person who could be trusted. After this, the scenes shifted to a few days later, when that Philadelphia nobleman arrived at the Assassin's Guild to ask the owner to remove the protagonist. In an even greater frenzy, he ordered a guild member to ensure he was given as much suffering as possible. The man was about to say something to him, but at that moment, he heard a knock at the door. The almost beaten man made his way there and began begging his lord to come outside, for they were already surrounded by palace knights. This assassin, hearing this, was petrified with fear. The messenger was about to add something to his speech, but he was immediately thrown out. Only two could hear the voice of the man who introduced himself as Theodore, the one honored to command the royal palace guard. The assassin instantly understood his situation and quickly changed the conversation, calling himself a merchant from the guild trading in groceries. The captain was no fool, so he immediately realized that this place definitely had nothing to do with selling wheat and fruits. To better understand, he immediately announced that the premises would be searched. The guild member trembled with fear and felt that the information had already been leaked, but asked him not to panic. There was no crime in that room. He knew all drugs were underground, so as long as they could keep the underground secret, everything would be fine for him. But fate had other plans, so the first thing the captain asked to investigate was a hidden room in the basement, concealed below. That guy knew everything with precise knowledge and was nearby, but the child still did not understand what was happening. Then the assassin told him that it was all over, he would die right now. The same was true for the nobleman. He fell into fear and then asked for some time to explain to them. He was the elder of the Shumlet family. The captain noticed that this name sounded as if it carried weight. The nobleman decided that the captain was afraid of him, so he asked to pretend as if nothing had happened. As expected, the captain suddenly changed his manner and said that he could do that if he wanted his father to be arrested. He wanted the boy not to let his status go to his head. And then he introduced himself. Supposedly, he is the one who can read the atmosphere in court. In his mind, it all boiled down to the fact that this is a crime, and throughout his entire investigative career, he had not written a single lie. And he also said that his father knows what he does, so he will definitely be recognized as a criminal. What he wanted to convey was simple. This is a classic case of cutting off the lizard's tail. To resolve this issue closer to the truth, he told him that this is the fastest way to settle a family quarrel. As if the entire court hall was a den of vipers, so when it came to families and their taste was found to be bad, all ties with them had to be severed. In the end, he concluded that ordering a murder is a serious crime, so there were no VIP cells in the prison. From the captain's lips it sounded too cold, and the nobleman still trembled at the very thought that his connection would be cut off. He declared, "There is no way out, this is absolutely impossible." And the killer asked him to calm down so as not to make things worse in court. In the end, he could no longer do anything. He only managed to get handcuffs put on him and to walk alongside other criminals. When they left, the captain could not understand who exactly was the man holding the documents on his desk. He remembered restraint and elegance in how the papers were folded. It was from the same person who had previously been his friend. But reality did not allow him to believe that it was really so. Then the scenes were moved to the academic hall. The nobleman's friends shuddered when they learned that he was captured by police knights. The news was confirmed by Charles, along with his expulsion from Magic Academy. The bad news was also that he was disarmed from the Shumlet family. Then they both felt only two were left. Michael had already been cut off, and Chad had already been arrested. What they understood from this was simple. Alfred had driven them into a dead end. They knew neither of them had any path left in life, so there was no doubt Alfred's power was real. Charles knew that there was no mercy against them. He would come for revenge. So he asked the others to keep the defense ready. They knew some people the biggest thugs, so they considered getting help from them. At that moment, one of them flashed past, and the noble approached him exactly the person they needed. He rushed forward to talk about the confident slave and asked him to take him on. That scoundrel immediately realized it was about Alfred, so he refused without hesitation. He had heard rumors that Alfred even subdued some professional killers, so he and his whole team had already decided to stay away from this person. After that, the scoundrel vanished instantly, as if he had never been there. But it wasn't long before two other nobles started fighting among themselves, while Charles kept a cool head. At first, he always thought both were fools, but he had no idea it would end like this. He did not care about status at school, and since two of his comrades were completely helpless at that moment, he himself sought to find a way out. He sought for a long time, then wondered if the effect Alfred went through was because he grew up in an environment where words alone were enough for desires to move and be fulfilled. Suddenly, one of the nobles remembered, if they lose in the show battle, then they would have to whip the classes with the slave. Charles was already tired of their chatter, so he ended their conversation and led them to the dining hall. Both decided that this was the right option, the best place to think through a strategy against Alfred. Charles was terribly confused when he imagined the opponent as a monster, so he was overly concerned about the two men he had to deal with. Then the scene moved to the dining room to the lunch hall, where the third grade was preparing food for the first grade. Suddenly, Alfred noticed a napkin on the table and asked Lisa to fold it nicely. She couldn't understand how he did it. It was not just with one, he did the same instantly for every table, for all without exception. Lisa found it truly exquisite. Suddenly someone sneaked up from behind and called him friends from the third grade. When Alford turned around, he saw the director behind him. The hero was glad that he finally came and felt this was the best time for their move. He did not hesitate at all and asked the director to consider his proposal even before the conversation. What exactly they talked about was not revealed. It was kept secret. Before agreeing, the director asked for some time because the decision could not be taken lightly. The director left, and Alford thought that the preparation for them was already complete. At Magic Academy, while the scheduled staff meeting was ongoing, the director explained, just like in the last exam, Alfred passed it with excellence with results never before seen in the academy. To find out his true worth, he sent a messenger to the royal capital for a magical trial and evaluation to check how truly exceptional he was. After that revelation, he asked Clive if he had promised to swap his class position if the third grade won. Clive wiped his glasses and clarified that it was just an exchange of words, and he never meant it that way. However, the director was thinking about this swap anyway. It happened suddenly, and the director added, "The 10 swords of the round table are determined only by abilities, and status connections mean nothing here." Moreover, he knew, rumors were circulating somewhere that the class management policy was unfair. After this, the director told him about a secret conversation between him and Alfred. When Alford told him that it was Clive who took nobility as the standard, and that it was inelegant at school. He wanted to personally, right at that moment, write the documents about the expulsion of that man. Clive shuddered when he found out that the man called him by name. Then the director added, "If the result of the battle reshuffles the classes, then, as the head of grades, the fate will fall on him, and he must answer in that situation." Clive was still writhing in pain. Alfred smashed all his previous records like a comet, so Clive already knew no ordinary student from Class 1 could defeat him. He also knew losing meant he would be expelled, so the disaster had already begun. He was even more furious because he considered himself to come from an elite family. Since at that age he had already reached the top of his group, he was supposed to be given the role of the main candidate for the next chancellor. He still could not understand how the hell it had gone so far. When Clive left the room, he ran into Charles. A conversation flared up between them. Clive said there was something they needed to discuss. He immediately got to the point and told him that both of them were in trouble. Clive also never expected that Alfred would go to such a level. Charles just told him that they were granted autonomy on campus as candidates for the round table 10 swords. Clive was stunned to hear this and immediately told him not to discuss such things because it was classified information. Charles knew better. If he told him, they would bring about their own doom if this continued. His proposal was a simple scheme. They needed to turn intention into war. He was going to intervene in the academy's self-governance system. And he knew, without entering 10 blades, it was completely impossible. In fact, he was going to use all available means to start the assault and wipe Alfred and his team off the face of the earth. Then the action moved to the student dormitory of Magic Academy, where the ordinary students lived. It was Lisa who saw the dream from the past, once her sister was secretly taken to the mansion of some grand noble. She heard that it all started when the Duke was walking incognito through the streets, but even as a child, Lisa had a vague feeling of it. Lisa pondered and joyfully felt that her sister would become the wife of the Duke. Her sister there was neither good nor happy, but as a child, she could not understand any of it at all. She only said good being, as expected, everything ended horribly. The sister was used as an instrument of pleasure, and the Duke's ugliness was finally revealed. The sister had to endure the mad jealousy of the Duke's lawful wife and the cruel tortures of revenge. Everything turned out worse, and Lisa remained in blissful ignorance and untouched by the truth. Lisa waited for months for the first letter from her sister, and now, after years, the first and last message arrived. Lisa was delighted with the letter. However, the contents told a completely different story. There were several gold coins. They were sent along with the commotion, and it was reported that her sister would not be married off, she would become a maid. She believed that they were trying to sweep everything aside with a pitiful compensation for sympathy. All she could remember then was the torment and suffering of her older sister. Nothing changed afterward. When she focused on her studies at Magic Academy, everything there remained the same. Nobles were nobles and slaves were slaves, and she was taken away just the same. Within her daily routine, she said goodbye to the image of her sister. And she set off for the academy. During the very first meeting, she ran into Alfred. He greeted her with good morning, and they both set off together. But the girl decided never to think of herself as someone who could be taken away. The day finally came. Its time for the last rehearsal duel in the trial battle had arrived. And she, intending to become stronger, was firmly determined to give everything. On the other hand, a message that someone had posted in advance was already hanging on the bulletin board. And Charles was planning to pull off such a thing that even Alfred would not be able to do anything about. Lisa was even more determined to do everything as best as possible in the three-way fight for threes that awaited her the next day. Alfred felt her stubbornness, so he calmed her down, saying that as long as he himself and Ciro's were nearby, everything would be fine. Lisa knew from the very beginning Alfred did not take her into account in the winning move. So it turns out she was there only to plug the gaps. She understood better than anyone that against two geniuses, especially together, an ordinary person like her would have a hard time. Thanks to knowing their weaknesses, they both entered the class and saw that Ciro was standing there. He was there with bad news right in the very heart of that moment, and revealed that the rules for the match had already been changed. Now they would have to fight inside each block, and the finals would be determined by the average percentage of wins. They understood this was a conspiracy of the nobility because they did not want to go headlong against Class 3. Lisa was exactly against the sudden change, so Cyrus told her that this was probably a setup of the candidates for 10 swords. Cyrus knew if the root of the plot is drawn by 10 candidates for 10 swords, then the rules can be easily rewritten. Alfred realized that tying the average win rate turned out to be a bit confusing. Cyrus further added that the lowest percentage for promotion there is 80. Since only two could win the fight, they already knew. In each match there would be one defeat. Lisa's suffering dragged on endlessly. She felt it was her fault that those two did not advance further. She continuously cursed herself with rage, but Cyrus immediately asked her to come to him. He had something he wanted to show her. She was taken to the laboratory and told that magic is something intertwined with the soul. It was known everyone who has been in both life and death has a greater amount of magical energy. Cyrus handed her a potion called Shinpins, a deadly poisonous drink. This technique could enhance magical power only once in a lifetime due to her success level. Everyone always tried to reach resurrection from the dead by undergoing about 5 years of training because the risk of dying was too great. Cyrus tried his best to encourage her. He gave her a guarantee that with him, she would not fight against her peers. Suddenly, he changed his tone and told her that this was only a prelude. After that, he asked her to return back to the class. Lisa was not a fool. So she understood and declared that the only reason he brought her there was to make her drink it. Cyrus is not one to be forced to ask her to go to her death, but Lisa knew the truth. If she continued to keep up such a pace, it would be impossible for her to survive. She knew the academy was already overcrowded with nonsense, and if she did not become stronger, the future would continue to slip away. Because she truly found a person who challenged this senseless absurdity, and now was firmly determined to walk that path alongside. With all this understanding, she knew in advance exactly what she needed to do. Immediately she drank the potion and Alfred and the rest froze in shock. She did this to stay steady and become a true comrade to them. As expected, as soon as it happened, the girl lost consciousness, and Alfred managed to save her before she fell. Zeros called him a bit soft-hearted for his action, and then asked Ford to return F. The mortality rate from the potion dropped from 50 to 0. The protagonist denied this, saying that he also had his limits. He knew if they wanted to preserve the effect of the medicine, they needed to invest in long-term healthcare. In the end, he called it complete nonsense and reduced the mortality rate. Alfred was moved by Lisa's determination. So as soon as she opened her eyes, he said that preparations were complete and that his comrades looked too refined because at the end awaits victory. Finally, the great day arrived, the day of the decisive representative confrontation. At the beginning, those nobles were lined up with some miserable children. They continued the fight and did not stop attacking to make them suffer. As soon as the last one won the match, another nobleman was glad about this. All three there remained undefeated. But Charles understood everything immediately. It was he who was laying out the matches. Both continuously mocked those boys, and Charles was pleased that there were two troublemakers next to him strong enough. Then he informed his comrades about the start of Alfred's team matches. The preparation was already completed. And the first battle became a face-to-face stake between an ordinary boy and a pro who suddenly broke into Class 3. The opponent's eyes were deadly dangerous. Very quickly, he dropped to his knees and instantly surrendered so much so that it shocked the others. Cyrus just laughed, calling it a wise decision, and then left, thanking him for sparing him the need to get his hands dirty. Those two noble scoundrels called it absolute nonsense. And then they plunged into a senseless fight. Charles remained calm, as always, and said that the next match was Alfred's. This time Alfred came face to face with a woman who immediately approached him stealthily. And in a pleasant, soothing voice she surrendered. When asked about the reason, she said she knew she would not win that duel anyway. Alfred was not one to retreat, so he asked her to try before going down herself. This encouraged her and she agreed to the match. At the beginning, Alfred summoned the magic of the 7th tier. They left that girl in complete agony. She thought he would show mercy. But Alfred did not stop there and cast a spell to hit the lady directly. She was overwhelmed by that magic, as if her body was torn to pieces, ripped apart completely. Even the thugs were shocked by his actions, but suddenly noticed something in the thin air. Inside that sphere were the referee and the lady, suspended in the air. When the magic on the ground faded, the bubble burst and both fell from a certain height. When the referee lay on the ground, he told them the rule: the one who ends up outside the arena is eliminated. The referee noticed this and declared Alfred the winner. After the fight ended, Siros was still in training with his master. He understood that there was a difference in their abilities, but felt accepting defeat before the fight is a betrayal of oneself. He knew that his master was saving the reputation of the students as warriors. Thus, in this style, Alfred was able to snatch victory, and at the same time preserve the reputation of a warrior. Instead, two thugs thought about their situation in case they had to face Alfred without any barrier to cover them. Charles asked them to calm down. He knew his team would inevitably fall apart. He was sure of this because he knew that in that team there would definitely be someone who would lose that match. In his eyes, the only weakness in Alfred's team was Lisa Wilson, but the man standing in front of her was Lydia, blazing like a flame. But Charles was too confused to think about Alfred and Siros, who would win in such a way. Persistent vagabonds were also sure of Lydia's victory. A candidate from the Slay class didn't even have a chance there. When Lisa stood still, she remembered Alfred's words that this test was for promotion. He was sure that the opponent would definitely see inferiority in her, so he was confident the enemy would show absolute superiority, and everything happened as he predicted. But he knew Lisa's special magic had to be in the realm of defense. Lisa did everything to block the attack with magic. At that moment, she thought to scream at the top of her lungs to tell them all about the use of the 5th tier of magic. It was called Spirit Guardian Barrier. Alfred was sure, in the entire academy among the students, there was no one who could break through her protective magic. It happened as expected. She devalued the attack with her protective magic. Livia was left in complete shock. She did not wait a moment after neutralizing, and immediately rushed to the rear of Levia for a swift, devastating counterattack. At that very moment, she used the 5-tier magic Ice Fang strike. That strike was enough to send Lydia flying away into the sky. Eventually, he ended up outside the arena and lay unconscious. Thanks to Alfred's prophecies and her magic, she finally secured her first victory. Then the action shifted to Alfred's family home, where Alfred's father at the funeral, Ulrin Beryl, was seen sitting in the cabin. The butler knocked on the door and entered to report something. These were talks about the young master, but Ulgrin had no interest in any information about him because he had already renounced him as a son. The servant tried again to explain something, pointing to the promotion exams. Ulgrin was too cold, and he decided that his trash son was lost somewhere just playing dead at the academy. There was no room for failure in his eyes, so he warned the butler, under no circumstances speak about this. The poor man fell into shock, and after all this was denied, said that his child had brilliantly passed the academic test. Ulgrin asked for more details, so the butler explained. Alfred could easily control 8th tier magic, and even in rehearsal tests his power was astonishing. Ulgrin found it too hard to believe. And then the butler, because of the last arrow, as the director said reports. The messages indicated that Alfred likely inherited legendary traits passed down from generation to generation. Kazalgar knew his family gained noble status because long ago creatures evolved from the union of humans and demons. He was immediately interested in the schedule of promotion exams. Just then Butler informed him about the final tournament, which will take place next week. Thus Ulgrin instantly asked him to cancel all plans. He was already preparing to be there to see his son win the final. He was glowing with joy upon hearing that his son was finally called a worthy son. But when the scene switched back to the previous exams, the nobles trembled at the thought that Alfred's team would reach the final. They had nothing to consider about what to do. One option was to retreat from the fight, but Charles rejected it. He said, whatever happens will happen if the battle fails. His anger will still last, and he will still be targeted. One of them was too worried about what would happen to him, but he knew they were not the ones who sow chaos. A memory came to him. It all started with a letter lying on Alfred's table. It depicted how he was abandoned by his family halfway, and the signature was made by a representative who called himself one of the 10 Swords. The next day everything continued the same and Alfred froze, stunned, in front of everyone. In the eyes of the noble on the picture of the criminal, they were not the ones who should fear revenge. Charles was worried about the fate of the person standing behind the 10 blades. In response he learned, for such an act one would have to pay with their own life. Charles knew this too, so he was going to take whatever he could by then, until his true identity was revealed. Then the scene shifted to the third class after the exam, where someone came to Alfred with proud, defiant eyes. He was the same person who denied ever creating any team to fight against Class 1. At that time, he was there to apologize to him, because it was he who pushed them back when they dared to challenge the top class. He continued that his sensational comeback truly impresses. The other two in the team were also strong, but in his eyes, Alfred was the one who pulled hope out of the very bottom for them, yet he believed he could never reach his level, no matter how hard he tried. Finally, he thanked Alfred for the hope and asked him to show his best even in the finals. Just as he was about to leave, Alfred accepted the thanks, but asked if he thought it was impossible to reach his level. And again, that boy saw nothing wrong with this. Alfred had experienced awakening, and Ciro's was a true talent. Then loudly and confidently, it was offered to her, and they told him about how Lisa drinks a secret elixir for that showcase battle, and about how she showed determination to challenge fate, risking half of her life. It was shocking enough, but Alfred added, Ciro is truly a genius, and what made him even more brilliant was his unwavering determination. He knew that by next week he would win the fight and free the class, giving them all the freedom they wanted. Everyone knows talent can be unfair, and in their world, equality was left only in words, but there was something common to all time, and there was enough of it to equalize. So Alfred asked him to choose for himself, to seize the chance or lose the sight of hope. He wanted that man to believe in himself and keep swimming in the same rhythm. The scene switched to the bulletin board. There was already a new entry, along with pairs for the finals. This message specified that it could be changed by 10 candidates from the sword list. As everyone knows, it was Alfred who could do this behind the head of the school. When the other students saw this, they were gripped by horror at the thought of how their conditions would end for the class. The finale will turn every student into a spectator. Everywhere there was buzzing talk about the finals, and Charles listened to everything. He understood the director was also under their control, and the meaning was simple: the final was not a played-out fight, but a direct invitation from Alfred to a revenge match. Even after he understood all this, he knew he had nowhere to run. When the scene switched to Class 1, the troublemakers were cornered and continuously questioned whether they could win the matches and save the class from even worse positions. Under continuous questions, one of the troublemakers sharply answered no, and everyone immediately reduced everything to the same excuse. Allegedly, the opponent is a monster who can control 8th rank magic. Then one of the girls praised them and said that even fools know winning a match by fair play is impossible, and she asked if they had any cheap tricks ready. The criminals knew this could not be handled this way, but she continued to give orders so that they would win as a great noble lord would do. They already had enough, so they ordered them to fight on their own in their own territory. The whole conversation boiled down to a senseless fight. At one corner of the seat, someone did not know about the capture. She was then told, if those boys lose the match, they will have to switch places with Class 3. The only thing that exchange meant was that they would have to become slaves, because no nobleman remained. But suddenly the aura of the Habsburg daughter changed. She did not want to exchange something like that, so she repeated it again and again. Later it became known. The class that was once completely united was already divided into parts they fought to avoid becoming slaves. Charles, on the other hand, ended up on the floor, after considering the circumstances he would have to face. The boy came there and asked Charles why he was in such a state. Charles called him an information broker and asked why he appeared here. This boy with a super sharp looked through papers at his feet, showing them as the reason for the sudden changes in Alfred's features. He came across something really interesting in the history of the National Library's lending. The book was borrowed by Alfred on the day just before he started attending the academy. These books contained recipes for physical enhancement and ways to temporarily boost magical powers. But again, there was a colossal risk in all this, just to try. Charles tries to understand and grasp what is happening. He realized that the grimoire of demonic summoning was once on the verge of forbidden texts. The informant told him, summoning a demon gives 2 paths for forging a powerful contract. The first to summon the demon into the mortal world, and the price for this was 1 soul. The second method consisted in raising the demon's body and becoming a vessel for its ascension into the world. Alfred could use the second method for his purpose. Then Charles suddenly changed his voice and began speaking to him soothingly, saying there are ways to overcome demons so they could truly win. On the other side of the wall was Clive, tormented by the thought that the academy might expel him if Alfred won the final match. He wondered whether he should go to the village and teach second-rate magic. It was a terrible suffering for him. And suddenly the director appeared. He leads Clive, also surprised by his appearance. The director was there to say, since children from the high nobility study in the first grade, if classes are changed, relatives and their guardians will not be satisfied with his head on a platter. He began to tremble, and the director ordered him to prepare for a line of apologies. The director knew the nobility would do everything possible to pull the necessary strings from everywhere. So it all boiled down to a simple fact. He would be banned from other magical academies in neighboring countries, and he would remain a mage simply unimaginable. Clive realized that not only his teaching, but everything was under threat. At the end, the director asked him to prepare for what was about to catch up with him in the near future. Clive froze for a moment. At that second, he understood that his current state was almost a death sentence. When the director left, Clive lost all hope. Then Charles approached him and asked him for a favor. Clive asked him if he was talking about Alfred, because he did not intend to get involved in something like that. Charles understood this too, so Clive asked him to comprehend and move on, leaving everything on his own terms. The member of the 10th Sword was not ready to lose hope and relied on the finals. And he asked Clyde to lend him help to enter the Forbidden Library. He wanted to visit the library and read something there to the place where ordinary students had no access. Clive was stunned and worried about what he was about to do. A student dealing with forbidden texts could face serious criminal charges. They both knew they were on the edge, so it was no time for any chatter or nonsense. Charles reminded, if this is not fixed, both he and Clive would be doomed. After some time, Charles gathered everyone in the room and told them that the secret behind Alfred's power had already been revealed. It happened that the boy was possessed by a demon. These words were enough to change the atmosphere in the class. In a moment, everyone began to agree with his conclusions. Someone knew to summon a demon, you have to pay a price, so he trembled even at the thought of what exactly he gave for this demon. Others were worried about who exactly had cornered him so tightly. They were eager to know exactly how they would approach that event. Charles, keeping calm, told them that this would not adultify anyone enough to call someone an adult. But then he introduced them to his sensei, so they would join their plan. As soon as this dirt crossed the threshold, he brought into the realm of death the Book of Invitations, a forbidden tome with a demonic spell, left by a sorcerer 30 years ago. As soon as everyone heard about this, they were overwhelmed with surprise instead of thoughts about what they would do next. Charles planned to get tooth for tooth, as if someone summons a demon, then they themselves must do the same. By the level of magic Alfred used, Charles decided to engage the Ninth Circle and summon a mid-level demon at that time. Everyone there was too excited to think about summoning a mid-level demon and defeating Alfred. But the one who did not like this was a representative of a great family. She immediately asked if a ritual spell was needed to summon a mid-level demon, so it turned out that a sacrifice was unavoidable. And it was important for her to know, did he mean any one of them? No one wanted to become a sacrifice for a cause that would turn into slavery. Charles told them that they really needed help with the ritual. And then he told them not to worry, because none of them were on Alfred's revenge list. He thanked those present, then asked the offenders to stay and allowed the others to leave. When everyone dispersed, the atmosphere suddenly changed. One of them asked Charles if he wanted someone among them to become the sacrifice. He answered this with agreement, but reveal this in such a way as not to lose your life and distribute the burden among them. Charles meant that both of them would sacrifice one hand for the cause. But before he could finish speaking, both lost their footing and asked him to give my call because he couldn't even use magic and was completely useless. And this one agreed too. Suddenly Michael burst into the room, shocking everyone else completely. He was here after sneaking out of the estate and came to give the demon both legs. Neither of them could believe it. He added that life was almost over, so his legs were no longer useful. Even then his partner habitually took care of the simplest needs, so he really did not want his legs at all. Moreover, he even laughed at Chad because he couldn't move, being in a cell. There his life was no more than a toy for a show. Every other day, the commoners amused themselves with him. All this inspiration was only so that they would ask them for their hands as sacrifices and calm down while living in society. Danny's then asked him why he was so fixated on Alfred. Michael told them the reason was that he was the only cause why their life had turned into hell. His voice grew more tense every second, so he decided to continue. Since he was about to lose the ability to walk again, they both had to choose to live with one hand or to live their life like Chad or like himself from then on. They both understood the task, and Charles asked them to keep this moment in memory where they would write the script for Alfred's slaughter. The event was already at the doorstep, about to begin, and Michael was ready to give everything he had for this cause. He was determined to pay for every single pain that tormented him. They all also demanded intervention from Chad, so Charles clarified that he had also played his part after revealing the place where he kept all his money. Charles was going to use that money to ask the criminal guild to kidnap Lisa Wilson. They arranged this to break Alfred's heart completely. Charles watched from afar and enjoyed the moment. Everything was going exactly according to his plan. He forced the teacher to commit a crime to get forbidden texts, and then lured those 3 offenders for the sacrifice needed to summon the demon. He was happy completely unharmed, even though he was the main instigator of all this. He controlled all the puppets in his bets. How can someone be so stupid as to think about how to catch the king? On the other hand, Alfred was calmly reading a book, while Cyrus was bowing before him, begging for forgiveness. In fact, Lisa had already been taken by the criminal guild, even though the apology was supposed to be the reason provided by Cyrus as the guard. Then Alfred wondered whose mind could outsmart Kira's mind, since their methods lacked no skill. In his eyes, this filth after kidnapping the girl for his own pleasure had lost all shyness. The protagonist immediately asked Kira to move forward. When Cyrus, unable to find peace, asked if everything would be fine if they acted according to the letter they received, we all knew Alfred was not going to play by the script, but what worried us was different. He had no intention of settling this elegantly. He meant that if any of them even touched Liza with a finger, he would break each of them. In the staff room, a completely different story was unfolding, where the director informed the others, after reminding them how the sample was sent to Alfred to the Magic Academy for power assessment. Clyde was more worried that everything could turn into a disaster, so the director revealed the details still remain unclear, but judging by the test results. While one of the 3 wise men, the famous holy burning Isabella, was supposed to be present, the staff could not believe it at all and thought that this was exactly what brought her to the school match. The director could do nothing except wait for reports from the capital. And the main thing that worried them then was how to deal with Alfred. Then the scenes were moved to the place where, according to rumors, the devil was worshipped. This was a land soaked with the blood of many, where the presence of the black man remained for far too long. No one could suddenly teleport to that location, but our protagonist in this story was a being of a different kind, not a human. During the interrogation, he was there after the news about the purchase of chickens, pigs, marijuana, and heroin. Moreover, they did not feel any movement of the members of the criminal guild, so they understood the exchange was already completed. Alfred gathered all the news, even about the fact that at this very moment people were summoning some demons. Cyrus was still worried about how he managed to squeeze so much information in such a short time. Cyrus realized, with the reserves they had, they could summon a mid-level demon and then it would no longer be a problem. And an experienced person later warned Cyrus that relying on assumptions is deadly dangerous and reminded him of the time when he got stuck against the Minotaur after he did not. Eventually, he entered the mansion, telling him, even a lion gives everything when hunting a mouse. In that villa, everything he uncovered was kept inside as a sacrifice. The students participated in the formation of that ritual, and Lisa was thrown far away. She completely lost consciousness. The bullies found that the place was boring. They did not have the necessary skill to complete the task. The conversation continued, and the guy denied that he went home without doing anything. Then he ordered another to look at his own feet, pointing at Lady Lisa. He wanted him to let her take charge, play with her to his heart's content. They sought to be the first in the performance, not allowing others to meddle in the feast. Their perversion grew every minute longer they looked at her, the more it inflamed them before this performance. Then they undressed her with their own hands, and then decided to go to the banquet. Fate had something else prepared for them again. Alfred came there, hit that freak against the wall, and broke all the bones in his body. Alfred apologized to Lisa for keeping her in such a place with such a disgusting smell. He decided to quickly hush up this matter. As soon as Mikkel heard this, he left the room in his wheelchair. Tell him that he will meet his death there. But Alfred was in a bad mood, so he demanded that they immediately bring everything they have at their disposal. All 3 confirmed once again, if he asks, they will all gather to him together. Cyrus thought about the presence of Mike Hall there, and Michael ordered him to pull himself together. After he saw it after the ritual they were performing right at that moment shouldn't have asked such questions. The ritual started instantly, and both thugs began losing one hand each, cursing Alfred to take him to hell. This sacrifice was enough for the ritual to work. But Nofred knew this was not enough, and even more would be needed. He was proven right at the very moment when the demon's spell was just beginning to end. Mitchell also began losing both legs, cursing Alfred. The protagonist went into battle, but Cyrus asked him to leave this part of the fight to himself. This was not something he could handle, and Kairos understood that too he could barely hold 7th-tier magic. That is, he subjected himself to a trial in order to achieve a good result. Alfred really wanted to know what he was aiming at. So Cyrus told him this directly. Essentially, being here is pure humiliation, but he just wants to stay close. He remembered all the magic the guild master showed him, so he was sure. There is no one but him to whom he can dedicate his life. Alfred realized that he wanted to become familiar to him, while rejecting the fact that he had never had a single one in his entire life. Thanks to this announcement, he allowed Cyrus to take the lead in battle. And he warned him, do not help even in the case of absolute death. Eventually, he allowed Cyrus to come in and show what he had received. When the battle began, Cyrus felt in this dreadful aura also a senseless level of magical power. Standing still, he already understood. 1 second of relaxation and it would be deadly. He began to ascend on it, using 6-step magic explosive fireball barrage. That strike hit exactly the devil's legs. And as soon as Michael noticed this, he saw that Cyrus was hiding in the smoke screen. For him, it was not a problem. The devil did not rely solely on sight. On the other hand, Cyrus used the screen to get to the devil's rear. But as soon as he was about to attack, the devil immediately noticed his appearance. And then they attacked that man from 0 distance. The guys were happy that this was the end. However, this happiness did not last. It was not Cyrus, but a 6-tier magical illusion ghost. Both the demon and the wanderers were shocked by this. Behind the demon himself, the real man was still unnoticed, relying on the fact that his additional mana worked towards the purpose of that illusory magic. It was then that he was already preparing to attack the demon with his magical enhancement. At that moment, something unexpected happened, and the devil managed to feel that strike. This time Cyrus had no defense. The devil took advantage of the moment and subdued our side actor, pressing him back into the ground. My challenger enjoyed the moment of the fierce battle. And then he even laughed at Kira's for deciding that he could defeat a mid-level demon with a 6-tier magical level. His luck shattered again as soon as the smoke cleared. Cyrus stood in the path of that strike, thinking about the sweat and blood he had given to training. None of them could believe what was happening at that moment. But this is not the end. Kir, without losing determination, completed the attack he had been preparing since the very beginning of the battle. It was a perfect punch right in the face of the average demon. Cyrus's physical abilities had a base score of 80, a passing grade. Even the great sage himself praised this. The blow that hit the demon in the face also changed his appearance. The enraged demon immediately lunged at the man, who was the center of attention. This time he didn't have the courage to move, so the great sage came there himself to save his student. He put Cyrus at a distance, and when asked for his help there, he initially refused. He decided, until he passes the exam, he will not ask for any help. But Ulfur told him that he was his student, so he could really do something for him. After that, Ulfur removed him Leza and ordered them to just wait until everything closed. His movement was so fast that Michael didn't even manage to notice him. He continuously mocked the man as if he could stop the inevitable. Then he told even more, introduced the demon as Ardos, who recently devoured the souls of 200 soldiers. My call was really not in his mind, and he relentlessly forced him to look at Cyrus's condition. His words wounded the protagonists like needles. He could not call his student a useless oaf because the latter, already knowing that he could not defeat the opponent in that fight, still rushed to attack the devil. While he was lost in thought, Michael incessantly babbled pure nonsense, advised the great sage to kneel and apologize to him. But even after the apology, he was not going to deviate from the plan and had already decided the punishment would be death. Since wolves always moved in packs, someone approached from behind. Inspiring himself with the role of a teacher who takes pleasure in saying that phrase, he was not alone. The whole class surrounded him. Clive was there to see Alfred die in that terrible grave situation. Everyone there laughed sinisterly and reshaped the surroundings into pure horror. It was no different from what happened then, when Alfred was bullied in front of everyone and everyone liked it. In the sage's gaze, it was utterly disgusting. Then the demon spoke and called him a small, worthless wizard from humanity. He asked the protagonist to put all his strength into a single strike. He wanted to see his capabilities. At first, Alfred was stunned when he saw how he spoke, and then he asked what was the reason for such generosity. The reason for that generosity is the presence of a person and his confidence. He again asked the person to hit him as hard as he could. The main character also set his demands high, and then he struck, releasing an attack that grew from one finger. That blow was enough to pierce the demon's stomach through and through. And a splash of red water from his ally sprayed right into the devil's face on the bald head. Not only him, the whole class was won, and the teacher all were speechless. The demon lay on the floor after one blow. And my bell made me think about the likelihood of that happening. After he saw a mid-level demon killed with one blow, he burst into a scream. He screamed continuously from shock, lying on the floor without legs with no chance that such a thing could happen at all. Charles, on the other hand, thought about summoning the court guards, but eventually decided to use the mid-level demon. He was too angry to think whether Alfred's strength even surpassed the knight's. It was then that Alfred said something to Mikkel, telling him a period of 6 months and 23 days and asking if he knew what that number meant. Mikkel was completely unable to comprehend. It was the time when the true owner of that body was suffering from their bullying. He introduced himself the executor of his own revenge, and then decided that Michael should feel as much time as that boy had suffered. It was then that he used 9th-level magic to summon a gate from another world. After that, he told him, behind that gate he held creatures of night terror. Michael recognized in it a plant monster that devours people to feed on them. The protagonist had a top-tier pet, Shadow Flora. As punishment, after capturing a person, Shadow Flora continuously shows them the most terrible nightmares. In reality, the boundary between how a soul turns into an empty shell is 6 months. And if they do not descend, they will have to carry deep scars in their hearts for life. He barely sent one to Mike when he returned to the others, and decided to send them to the same fate. They all called it complete madness, as if living in hell. Alfred cast a deathly glance at them, asking if they were not the first to do so. The troublemakers realized that this was pure hell and that it was complete nonsense. But on the other hand, Charles smiled and immediately clapped his hands for Alfred, praising him for what he had done. When McCall asked him to find another way to save them, he told about its existence and then asked everyone to cooperate for this. Everyone agreed because they were ready to do anything to escape from there. Charles asked them again if they could do something to prevent it, even if it meant risking their lives. This statement instantly plunged them all into absolute fear. Before anyone could respond, Michael immediately objected. And then he ordered everyone to take Alfred to hell with them. He needed blood for his revenge. Charles smiled sincerely. He knew the contract was already sealed. So that was what he was aiming for. The magical summoning circle was masterfully completed. So even if they could offer sacrifices on a larger scale, they would still be able to use the ultimate magic. That bastard was really preparing to summon a higher-level demon with his preparations. Suddenly, Mike began sifting through thoughts about his life, because he felt a pain that no one had ever experienced. Not only him, some other students also began to lose self-control. Clyde was in shock when he saw he had sacrificed all his classmates. He did it because each of them was noble, so that even if someone was left behind, he could avoid execution. Before Alfred's eyes, Michael died, but in reality, Alfred had no such plan at all. Charles then told him that he felt the same about their classmates, because he also never intended to take other lives. These words made the hero realize he was the one who had been behind the whole plan from the very beginning. Charles praised his abilities, the skill to recognize a person of honor at first sight. When Alfred asked why he was being persecuted like that, he named the reason. No matter how much he crammed, Alfred always got a higher position because of his noble origin. On the other hand, Alfred did not remember that he behaved badly towards him, and he truly believed that they were best friends. For the first time, Alfred lost control to prove to him this is not friendship his parents forced him. His family wanted to see in him a loyal partner, so in the end he abandoned his family for revenge. But suddenly he realized the time had come. He summoned the demon called Blade of the Demon King, Abaddon. That time was no joke. The monster that came out was such that one could not joke about it. Charles lost his mind and thought only about the revenge he had been nursing all these years. Finally arrived the blade of one of the demon lords, the god-killing demonic dragon. Clive was among those who could not believe that such a thing was happening at all. He insisted, "This is truly impossible." Ofer did not even flinch once, and he immediately recognized the demon as Nebula Minion, one of the 5 death god blades. This information was such that even Charles could not comprehend it, and then the demon suddenly spoke and told him that this name is recognized only by the 5 arch-gods and friends. Charles could not find words. Ulford had just laughed at that dragon, stating that he was probably nobody, a man not of great importance. Then the dragon began to sweat profusely, and then, finally, he recognized in Alfred the majestic archmage Cedric. Suddenly both began to speak casually, and the monster started asking him to visit for some time. Charles still remained silent. He could not believe he was standing before a man whom even the demon dragon considered a master. And simply put, he was standing before the supreme sage of the heavens. He could not understand a single thing, and then confirmed it from Alfred himself about his true identity. Alfred finally introduced himself as Cedric, the supreme sage, and said that he had simply been reincarnated in this body. Charles could not believe such a level of reincarnation, but when he remembered that this man was the only sage in human history to reach such a level. All events before Lenz began to do everything perfectly finally formed a clear picture. He immediately dropped to his knees, and only then realized that even the demon was on the man's side. Then he said to him, if he wants to win, let him summon the Lord of Demons himself. Charles called it complete nonsense. The demon lord would not pay attention to the call of an ordinary mortal. Ford found nothing disgusting in this, but still asked him to summon someone stronger. If Abaddon had talked about agreements with their first for 20 years then Charles finally understood everything and laughed in despair, thinking that this was really the great sage Cedric from the heavens. The sage was not one to let go unpunished when someone cornered young Alfred, kidnapped Lisa, and stabbed 30 of their classmates. Justice was decided to be served at any moment. So to do this, he used magic and threw a knife right in front of himself, while Charles continued to wait for justice to be served. But he could not understand what it meant, so he said that this was the only mercy he could offer, and asked him to decide whether he would use it or not. After he took the average lifespan of his classmates, the second punishment for him was 50 years, and he took a life equivalent to 1,600 years. The suffering of the shadow flora became a continuous nightmare for the next 5 years. Charles truly realized there was no place for mercy in Cedric's dictionary. The explanation for mercy was then clear, and then he was again asked to end life with honor. Or he would accept the second punishment to endure suffering from the shadow flora. He gave a chance to choose his own fate. Trembling with pain, he decided to use the knife. He looked at his reflection in the blade and immediately began to beg for forgiveness from Cedric. He seized the excuse about how Alfred remembers them as friends. He was sure Alfred would not do anything so terrible to his best friend and would stand by him, hold his side. Cedric called it complete nonsense to ask for forgiveness without showing any resistance. He swore while choosing his swords. Soon the shadow floor threw out tentacles of shadows, and he kept asking for it to wait somehow. While he was being dragged, Cedric decided to say the same words he said when Alfred needed him the most. Alfred said goodbye to him and asked never to cross paths there again. Eventually, he was completely covered by flora mercilessly. That same night, the director inspected the place along with the rest of the staff, and he saw the clothes of 30 students all covered in blood. Everything was neatly folded except for the demon's corpse. The director could not believe his eyes at what had happened. They could not understand why at that moment the students were calling the demon and called it complete nonsense. One of the employees found Clive collapsed in the corner of the room and began to question whether he was even there. So many questions arose that everyone needed answers, and the first concerned, who had so thoroughly scattered the students' uniforms. It was then that Clyde told them that the students were summoning demons from the forbidden text, but he was so frightened that he couldn't realize. Each of them was already dead at that very moment. Clive was at a loss for words, while the other teachers insisted that it was a matter of responsibility because his class was full of nobility. They continuously demanded answers and further questioned whether he meant that he himself had done it. He told them that it was Alfred who defeated the mediocre demon, and for him it was like a piece of cake. Since he lost consciousness, he could not remember what actually happened afterward. Other staff members told him that they rushed there immediately after the report from the 3rd grade. He assumed perhaps Charles also lost consciousness like him, and then he would have been devoured by the dragon demon, but the reason for concern was different why he was even living there at all. He pulled the book outside. Since everyone was dead, it would be up to him to take responsibility. But he tried to calm down and immediately thought of a cheap trick to get out of this situation. But it would not happen again. The principal had already taken hold of him. He declared that since everything was already out of his control, he would be handed over to the police knights. The most likely sentence, they would behead him. When he heard this, he completely lost his mind, and laughing at himself, he grabbed his own neck with his own hand. Then the action shifted to the same day in the palace. There someone was talking about Isabella's taste, until she asked about the flesh of a child around the age of 12. Isabella saw nothing wrong with this after all. It was there that she was sheltered. This was the same man who deceived our Cedric Ammon. He told her that even commoners can see she always looks for fresh young flesh for the sacrifice. Then Isabella reminded him about the visit to the Magic Academy the next day, calling it sheer trouble. It was then that he reminded her that the Supreme Sage is searching for the laws of reincarnation. So it was very likely that this was why he so easily swallowed the poison that time. They knew if that was the case, then the Supreme Sage had been reborn. Then there must be a reason why he has to die at that very moment, or a second reason that in Isabella's understanding, he had some kind of insurance. Reincarnation was supposed to mean that he would be restarted as a baby, but Ammon knew better to be cautious than to regret later. So they needed to confirm this young man to prevent the worst-case scenario. Ammon knew if he makes a comeback, they must remove the sprout before it turns into a small plant. She felt that he was overcautious then, but still asked him to give her some space so that her passion could be fulfilled. Ammon, like a true gentleman, immediately left the room, asking her to enjoy the moment she loved. Isabella immediately called the new girl, let her be the first target. Cruelty crossed the line when she threw wine on her legs and forced her to taste it. The poor baby crawled to her feet, then began licking the wine from her socks. She enjoyed it to the fullest, and was even glad that Ammon left. Now she could do whatever she wanted. After that task, she asked the girl to come with her, then led her to her room. The room was completely covered with red marks, and this beast was asking the little child to share the room with her. Finally, the day of the finale came. Allegren was preparing to go out. After the incident with the demon that turned all progress upside down, he was still in good spirits. It was good that his son won in the absence of an opponent, but he still believed a win is a win. He also heard that Isabella had arrived at the award ceremony. He was truly incredibly pleased to see Isabella with his own eyes during Magic Academy. Then he asked the butler if it reminded him of memories about that story, and the butler answered affirmatively. He had seen in what weak condition Alfred was and how he recovered from there. Allegren did not miss a single opportunity to praise his child for the first time in a long time. He was going to engrave in the family's mind the highest masterpiece of their lineage. The judge-servant could no longer endure it, so, forgiving, he asked if they had renounced Ulford earlier and if Allegren really considered Ulford's feelings. It was a true revelation for that man, but he got so angry that he called the butler a commoner and declared that this question was disrespectful. The servant calmed down, and that man continued to mock him, calling him a fool for not understanding how the nobility really works. In his eyes, it was not something happening for the first time, as if rising from the dirt of the earth back to the heavens. In the end, he concluded that in such a state, they could not demand any complaints. The serf knew from the beginning that this is exactly what he would do. Meanwhile, that man was going to extend his connections to Isabella, so he summoned a doctor there. When she appeared, he asked her to tell the maid to prepare 5 bars of gold as a gift. The servant was completely confused upon hearing this. Gold ingots were what they had been saving to save the farmers from hunger. It was an urgent concern, but in Allegra's eyes, it had nothing to do with that. What was needed was nothing else, but to earn trust then and establish a connection. He was already about to make a proper acquaintance, so in his eyes, a small gift would not hurt anyone. When the scene returned to the school again, the director explained to Cedric that he had been transferred from the educational institution. He considered it a good sign. Given the number of deaths among the nobility, expulsion from the academy turned out to be almost a lucky coincidence. Cedric apologized, considering himself guilty. But the director definitely knew everything had come to this because of his own fault. He understood that he should not have taken on this slay class matter at all. The director deserved such a result after all. He had taken responsibility for its launch. Then he continued speaking to Cedric. As soon as he saw his strength, he immediately felt deep respect. It was then that he finally became convinced that in the future Cedric would definitely change the academy's work. As expected, Cedric really completed this task with such speed that it far exceeded even his own expectations. Eventually, he summed up with words about how he sincerely prides himself on this man. It was then that Alfred decided to help that old man in his matter. He knew specialization in headmaster magical toxicology. Moreover, he knew that his most famous work concerns the possibility of neutralizing poison through barrier magic. The director was shocked at how a student of his level could understand something like this. Cedric said nothing more, only informed that there is a man named Throder, captain of the police knights, and he is looking for an exceptional toxicologist. Everything was spinning in the director's head, but Cedric pulled back and gave him, let him provide him as a recommendation for the position. Then the camera switched to the concert hall. Everyone was clapping there. The focus was on 3 from Class 3. They not only won the match, they also managed to abolish slavery. From the very beginning, it was clear they were on a completely different level, and each of them had already climbed the stairs during this. In the midst of all this, his father called Alfred. He was proud that he made the whole hall celebrate for him. Again, he declared his faith to raise the name of the funeral family and show the world all the brilliance of their bloodline. Ulford did not say a word, so he asked why he was so silent there. In his opinion, the son should have bowed his head before the parents to accept the praise he received from them. Then I will turn to the butler and ask him a question. It was about who exactly is standing next to him. Olgren was speechless and confused at that question. As Alfred could recall a person like him, he told the boy that he was disowned. He remembered the man who told the protagonist his existence in the family was completely erased, and it was an unconditional order. He was neither brushed off, postponed, nor nullified. Ulford ignored his elder and left the place. Olgren was in despair, having no idea whether he was really ignoring him. and was stunned to see how that boy so easily rebuffed his father. On the other hand, when Alfred saw Isabella sitting on the throne, he never imagined he would meet her like that. All three received a certificate of achievement. The happiest was Lisa Wilson. Then the director asked everyone to give Alfred an ovation and addressed the wise Saint Isabella of the three saints to deliver a welcoming speech. She was most interested in Alfred himself. She wanted to know the real reason for his sudden rise to supreme power. She was getting closer and closer. He stared incessantly to find out the reason. She scolded the young man in front of everyone, and a witch's expression froze on her face. Well, Ford felt it just as always after all. He was the one who first taught her to study the opponent's capabilities in order to break through his weak spots. In fact, he used the technique of magical concealment, so that witch decided he was such a weakling that it was not even worth barging in for anything. But before she could leave, she liked his appearance, and she asked if he wanted to join the evening she was organizing. She felt that she had to ask the man, the head of the family, if she could sleep with his son for one night. Allegren saw a golden moment in this and was already receiving it, as if everything had been prepared. He heard that Lady Isabella's stories were quite hot adventures, so he reasoned, if Alfred was capable of making love that night, the status of the funeral family would sharply rise. Again, destiny wrote something else, so Ford instantly refused the invitation. From this refusal, the father simply did not know what to say. He continuously scolded his son for dismissing his orders as if nothing had happened. What worried him most was something else. His own son was ignoring him. No father could endure that. When Isabella asked why she was refused, Alfred excused himself by lack of experience with women. The man mocked that witch right in front of her face, and she felt it. Eventually, she declared that at that moment, he was not needed by her. Alfred felt that this was like an exchange she had already anticipated, but at such a pace he was sure his role, the other, would disappear. Soon Isabella asked to be released from there, and while the director repeatedly told her about the preparations for a lavish banquet in her honor, she left, mocking their food. They had nothing else. When everything settled down a bit, Alfred told Cyrus that he had always looked for a chance to understand them, but everything happened too suddenly. He decided that there was no need to save the boy's soul, it was time to act. Cyrus was eager to find out when he would strike the three wise men. Cedric told him that now was not the time yet, because he was only about 1/10 as strong as he had become at his peak. Kairos was stunned to learn that everything he had done so far was only 1/10. He felt that they were capable of defeating the three wise men right at that moment. And Cedric told him again, if it were Isabella, he could do it right then. But he knew that the next battle against those who remained would be on a knife's edge, so he waited until he regained his best strength before the attack. Eventually, he ordered his subordinate to take care of the absence of the papers that had to be submitted to the university for further forwarding to the north, including Lisa. He agreed, but asked if Lisa had been given a concession in this. The reason for her indulgence was the belief, if she drinks and he is not nearby, then her life would definitely be in danger within 2 weeks. In reality, even if they had avoided a 50 chance of instant death, she still paid a colossal price for her new power. At that moment, Lisa bursts in and tells them both to just go to the buffet. It is so tasty, and the food was already waiting for them right then. Both were frightened and turned pale. It seemed as if she had no idea what she was going through. Cedric realized that the right time had come. She finally needed to know everything. And then he told her the full story. She was shocked that Alfred was capable of such a thing, since he was not supposed to be able to do it. This confused him because she spoke in fragments, so he continued the story, although in reality, the identity of Lord Alfred, the supreme sage Cedric. It was impossible to swallow this news. As expected, she began to cut off any possibility that it would happen. Cyrus knew that this was a harsh blow for her. And in fact, it was not just a shock for her, it was a 440-volt electric shock. Even the great sage Cedric asked her to calm down because she would not survive if she continued to react the same way. After that, Cyrus asked him about the news regarding his leaving the academy. Then he said he was setting off to visit an old acquaintance, as he first had to settle matters with Isabel and regain his peak strength as soon as possible. He knew that there was still time before the sacrifice to be given to the demon, and even Cyrus was impressed. He managed to defeat Isabel, but still tried to be fully prepared for any scenarios. Cedric responded with agreement. He asserted that a victory with a large advantage was the only thing that mattered to him. Later, all three found themselves at the place for the cruise. One of the riders informed him that due to dangerous monsters lurking nearby, they would have to travel together with the caravan, like Remora. Alfred agreed to this, and they were seated inside the caravan. Finally, they set off on the road. Lisa enjoyed the view outside the carriage window, and Cedric informed them that they were about to enter the domain of Dragonkin, These were the icy northern borders of Val Norleys. Lisa was worried. I wonder if it was really safe, given how many times it had been attacked in the recent past. It was then that Cyrus told her, since Lord Cedric defeated the dragon, it had been calm. And Lisa, for her part, began to think that all this time she had been traveling alongside a very serious person. And this feeling threw her into a real adventure. She was determined to prove to everyone, even commoners can become imperial sorceresses. Just like Cedric did, her eyes sparkled with dreams of achieving the highest in the world. Cyrus added that everything had changed in this area. People had now started attacking the dragon tribes. After further clarifications, it turned out, as soon as the Dragonkin, who were once at the top, lost the ability to transform their precious dragon stones, they were taken away while armed people captured dragon stones and turned them into slaves for themselves. In Alfred's view, if the Dragonkin were fierce and invincible warriors, then there should be no reason for conflicts, since Mickeldara had already been defeated. The real reason why everything started and kept going turned out to be simple. Behind everything they went through stood Isabel. The open display of cruelty from both sides was horrifying, and as always, the main character did not find it elegant at all, forcing people to exhaust themselves for the sake of their own twisted amusement. It was then that the carriage stopped, and the passengers were immediately thrown down. It seemed something had happened, so as soon as Cyrus stepped out of the carriage, he saw a man ordering amateurs to keep their distance. After the investigation, it became known they were attacked by a pack of monsters. That man was from a mercenary squad. He came to help the caravan people. He used arrogance, claiming he was helping students from the academy. The horde was a pack of orcs. Lisa knew someone from the Magic Guild would handle this, but a student from the Magic Academy would not. But when she thought about it more deeply, she realized she was already a fool even having full knowledge.